Family kicked me out on my birthday. Now they want my new home as a family asset. I always knew my family didn't appreciate me, but I never expected them to throw me out like garbage, especially on my birthday. I'm Robin. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how my family kicked me out on the street, only to come crawling back when I finally made something of myself. I had been living with my parents, Susan and Mark, and my younger brother, Tom, in a cramped, run-down house that always smelled like mold and disappointment. The place was falling apart. The plumbing was unreliable, the walls had water damage, and the heating barely worked in the winter. But somehow, I was the only one keeping it together. I worked as a marketing assistant, which wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And when I say bills, I don't just mean my expenses. I covered a big chunk of the household costs, paid for groceries, covered utility bills, handled home repairs whenever something broke. Meanwhile, my mom treated me like I was a failure just because I didn't have a real job. If it was a real job, you'd have your own place by now, she'd say, barely looking up from her magazine. No matter how much I contributed, in her eyes, I was still just a burden. And my brother Tom? Let's just say, he did nothing. At 26 years old, Tom was unemployed and lived off our parents while pretending to be a social media influencer. The only thing he contributed to the house was his smug attitude. And yet, somehow, I was the problem. Despite everything, I was excited about my birthday. I knew it wouldn't be some huge celebration, but I thought, just maybe, my family would at least acknowledge it. I even bought my own birthday cake, thinking we could have a small family dinner. A few days before, I brought it up with my parents. Hey, I was thinking we could do something for my birthday this weekend. Just hang out and have some cake. My mom didn't even look up. We'll see, Robin. We might have plans. Plans? On my birthday? I should have known something was up. On the day of my 28th birthday, I woke up feeling optimistic. At work, my coworkers sent me birthday messages, and I even treated myself to a new outfit. Things were looking up, right? I drove home, half expecting to see balloons or maybe a small cake on the table. Instead, I pulled into the driveway and felt my stomach drop, because there, on the front lawn, was everything I owned. Boxes, bags, clothes, books, just dumped outside like trash. I jumped out of my car, my heart pounding, and rushed to the porch. And there they were, my mom, dad, and Tom standing on the porch, staring at me like I was a stranger. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking. What's going on? My mom stepped forward, her face blank. Robin, it's time for you to move out. You're not welcome here anymore. I froze. Move out. I repeated, my voice cracking. On my birthday? I turned to my dad, hoping, begging, for him to say something, anything to stop this. But he just stared at the ground, hands stuffed in his pockets. He couldn't even look at me. Then Tom smirked. Maybe you should have thought about that before being such a burden all these years. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. A burden? I was the one paying the bills. I was the one keeping the house from falling apart. I was the one pulling my weight while Tom did absolutely nothing. And I was the problem? I looked at my mom, still hoping, praying, for some kind of explanation. She just shrugged. It wasn't enough. Then, in the coldest voice I had ever heard, she said, "Consider it our gift to you, independence." I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. So, with tears burning my eyes, I asked, "Can I at least get my things?" My mom didn't blink. "They're all packed." She gestured to the boxes on the lawn, as if this were just another chore to cross off her list. That was it. No apology. No second chances. No concern about where I'd go. Just cold indifference. I packed my car with as much as I could fit. With my hands shaking, I grabbed box after box, refusing to break down in front of them. When I finished, I turned to them one last time. "Why today?" I whispered. "Why on my birthday?" My mom didn't even hesitate. It seemed like the right time. And just like that, I was gone. I spent my birthday night alone in a dingy motel, surrounded by my hastily packed belongings. There was no cake, no celebration, just me, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the people who were supposed to love me could be so cruel. I could have spiraled that night. I could have let the pain destroy me, but instead, I made a promise to myself. I would never rely on them again. I would pick myself up, no matter how hard it got, because clearly, I was on my own now. Waking up in that cheap motel room, surrounded by my life stuffed into boxes, I felt numb. It wasn't just about being kicked out. It was the realization that my family had never really cared about me. If they had, they wouldn't have thrown me out like garbage, on my birthday, no less. But if they thought I was going to crawl back, begging for help, they were dead wrong. I was going to survive without them, and one day, I'd make sure they regretted every second of what they did. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I went to work. What else was I going to do? I couldn't just sit around feeling sorry for myself. I had to figure out how to keep moving forward. At first, my coworkers didn't notice anything was wrong. But after a few days, my boss, Hannah, pulled me aside. It was late, and the office was nearly empty. "Robin, can we talk?" she asked, leaning on the edge of my cubicle. I forced a fake smile. "Yeah, of course. What's up?" She gave me a knowing look. "You're going to work yourself into the ground at this rate. What's going on?" I didn't want to get into it, but the second she asked, everything came spilling out. I told her everything. How my family kicked me out on my birthday, how I was living out of a motel, how I had nowhere to go. For the first time, I let my walls down. Hannah listened. She didn't interrupt. And when I was done, she let out a deep sigh. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. I shrugged, feeling embarrassed. "You're my boss, not my therapist." She waved me off. "Forget that. Look, Robin, I have a spare room at my place. It's not much, but you're welcome to stay until you get back on your feet." I just stared at her. "Are you serious?" She nodded without hesitation. "Of course. I know what it's like to be in a tough spot. Don't even worry about it." I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. I wanted to cry, but I managed to hold it together. "Thank you," I whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." She smiled. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself." And just like that, I had a place to stay. The next day, I packed up my stuff from the motel and moved into Hannah's guest room. It was small, but it was clean, warm, and safe. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt like I could breathe again. But I didn't let myself wallow in self-pity for long. I threw myself into work harder than ever. If I was going to make it on my own, I needed to push myself to the limit. I took on extra projects. I started doing freelance gigs on the side. I saved every penny I could. I was exhausted. There were nights I stayed up until 3 a.m., barely able to keep my eyes open while finishing a client's project. But I kept telling myself, every late night, every all-nighter, every sacrifice was worth it. Because soon, I wouldn't just be surviving. I'd be thriving. During all of this, my best friend, Mike, was a lifesaver. We had been friends since college, and even though he lived in another city, we always stayed close. When I told him what happened, he was furious. "I can't believe they did that to you," he said over the phone. "You deserve better." I sighed. "Yeah, well, it is what it is." Mike, being the goofball that he is, tried to lighten the mood. "You know what would really piss them off," he joked, "if you became wildly successful and rubbed it in their faces." I laughed, but the idea stuck with me. Not that I wanted revenge. Okay, maybe a little. But mostly, I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't need them, that I could make it on my own. So that became my mission. Work harder. Save more. Get out of Hannah's guest room and into my own place. Months passed, and little by little, everything started coming together. My freelance work took off. I started getting bigger clients. I was bringing in more money than I ever had before. Then, one day, Hannah called me into her office. She was smiling. "Robin, I have some good news." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah." She leaned forward. "How does lead designer sound to you?" My heart stopped. "Are you serious?" She grinned. "Dead serious. You've earned it." For a second, I thought I was going to pass out from excitement. I had done it. Everything I had worked for. Every sleepless night, every sacrificed weekend, every ounce of energy I had poured into my work. It was all paying off. I wasn't just getting by anymore. I was thriving. And soon, I would have a home of my own. No one could ever take that away from me. A few weeks later, I started looking for my own apartment. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt like I had control over my life again. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. The name flashing across the screen? Tom, my brother. The same brother who stood there and watched as my life was ripped away. The same brother who smirked as my belongings were tossed onto the lawn. I hesitated. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. Hello? There was a pause. Then, in a small, hesitant voice, Tom said, Robin, I need help. I stared at my phone, gripping it so tightly my fingers ached. Tom needed help. The same Tom who stood on the porch, smirking as my belongings were thrown onto the lawn. The same Tom who called me a burden. Now, months later, when I was finally building a life without them, he had the audacity to ask me for help. I should have hung up, but against my better judgment, I asked, help with what? Tom let out a long sigh. Look, things aren't great at home. I raised an eyebrow, not that he could see me. Oh, and whose fault is that? There was a long silence before he finally admitted, Mom and Dad are struggling. I scoffed. And that's my problem, why? Tom hesitated, then muttered, because they need money. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Of course. They didn't call to apologize. They didn't call to say they regretted what they did. They called because they needed something. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice as calm as I could. Tom, I was homeless because of them. They threw me out with nothing. Now that I'm finally back on my feet, you really think I'm going to turn around and save them? Tom exhaled sharply. I know, but things are different now. How? I snapped. Did Mom and Dad suddenly grow a conscience? Silence. Then, he said something that made my blood run cold. Robin, they want to move in with you. I nearly dropped my phone. I actually had to pull it away from my ear and stare at it, as if I had misheard. Move in with me? The same parents who made it clear I wasn't welcome in their house? The same parents who threw me out like trash? Now that I had a stable home, they suddenly thought they could claim a piece of it? Tom continued, his voice cautious. Look, I know it sounds bad, but Mom and Dad are in serious debt. They're behind on the mortgage. If they don't come up with money soon, they're going to lose the house. I shook my head in disbelief. And that's my problem because... Tom sighed. They just figured, you have a good job now. You have a place. And family sticks together, right? I let out a cold, humorless laugh. Family sticks together? That's rich coming from you. For months, I had been preparing for this moment. I had worked my ass off to build a life without them. I had struggled through the loneliness, the anger, the betrayal. I had clawed my way back from rock bottom. And now that I had something good, they wanted to claim it as their own? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Tom, listen to me very carefully. I could hear him holding his breath. You and our parents made your choice. You threw me out on my birthday. You let me suffer. You let me struggle. And now that you're the one struggling, you suddenly want to pretend we're a family again? Tom stammered. Robin, come on. No. Silence. Then, in the coldest voice I could muster, I said, you're all dead to me. Then I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. After that call, I knew my parents weren't going to stop. So, I took action. I blocked all their numbers. I told my building manager not to let them into my apartment complex. I warned my job that my estranged family might try to show up. And just in case, I reached out to my lawyer friend, Mike, and told him everything. Mike listened, then said something that made me pause. You might want to file a restraining order. A restraining order? I repeated. He nodded. If they're desperate, they might try something crazy. Protect yourself. I sighed, rubbing my temples. You really think they'd do something drastic? Mike didn't even hesitate. Yes. By the time I officially moved into my own apartment, I felt like I had finally won. No parents breathing down my neck. No toxic family demanding my money. No reminders of the pain they put me through. I furnished my place exactly how I wanted it. I bought nice furniture for the first time in my life. I hung up artwork that made me happy. And I told myself, this is mine. No one can take it from me. But my family? They weren't done with me yet. A few weeks after settling in, I came home to find a letter taped to my door. I felt a wave of dread as I pulled it off and opened it. And the second I read the words inside, my blood boiled. My parents were demanding that I recognize my apartment as a family asset. They actually had the audacity to claim that because I was their daughter, my home was legally part of the family's wealth. I stood there, gripping the paper, my hands shaking with rage. They weren't just asking for help anymore. They were trying to steal from me. I stood in my apartment, gripping the letter of pure insanity in my hands. My parents actually thought they had a right to my home. After kicking me out on my birthday, after letting me struggle alone, after treating me like I was nothing to them. Now, suddenly, my apartment was a family asset? The sheer audacity made my blood boil. The letter, written by my mother, was full of guilt-tripping nonsense. Robin, you've always been part of this family. We know things have been difficult, but family is family. Now that you have a stable home, it's only fair that you open your doors to us. Fair? Where was that fairness when they threw me out? Where was that family loyalty when they forced me into a motel with nothing? And the best part? Since we raised you, this home should be considered part of our shared family wealth. We expect you to do the right thing and let us move in. They expected me to just hand over my home? I felt rage bubbling inside me. They weren't asking. They were demanding. And I was about to shut them down for good. I should have known the letter was just the beginning. 2 days later, my parents showed up at my door. I had just come home from work when I saw my parents standing outside my building. My mother, father, and of course, Tom. My stomach tightened. I wanted to turn around and pretend I didn't see them, but they spotted me. Robin. Finally, my mother called out, waving dramatically. I clenched my jaw and kept walking. They followed me to the building entrance, and just as I was about to scan my keycard, my father grabbed my arm. Robin, we need to talk. I pulled my arm away. No, we don't. Don't be like this, my mother said, trying to force a smile. We're family. I glared at her. Really? Because the last time I checked, my family threw me out with no warning. Tom crossed his arms. We were just trying to teach you responsibility. I let out a harsh laugh. Oh, right. And now that I actually am responsible, you suddenly want a piece of what I built? They exchanged a look, like they weren't expecting me to fight back. Then my mother sighed dramatically. Robin, let's be reasonable. You have plenty of space here. Letting us move in is the right thing to do. I laughed in her face. Are you actually out of your mind? You want me to let the people who kicked me out come live with me? My father stepped forward, his tone shifting. We are still your parents, Robin. We raised you. You owe us this much. And there it was. The expectation. The belief that I would always be under their control. I took a deep breath, then said, loud enough for the entire street to hear, I don't owe you a damn thing. Their faces dropped. My mother's eyes widened like she couldn't believe what I had just said. My father turned red with anger. And Tom? He just scoffed like he was above all of this. Robin, don't be dramatic, my mother finally said. I held up a hand. No, you listen to me. You kicked me out. You forced me to rebuild from nothing. And now that I've actually made something of myself, you suddenly want in? I shook my head. That's not happening. My father took a step closer, his tone dark. You will regret this. I stared him down. No, Dad. You're the one who's going to regret ever thinking you could treat me like garbage and still expect my help. Then I turned, scanned my keycard, and walked inside, leaving them standing outside like the strangers they had become. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Tom. Mom's talking to a lawyer. You better be ready. I blinked at my screen. They were actually going through with it, trying to claim my home legally. The insanity of it almost made me laugh. But I wasn't going to let them bully me again. So, I did what I should have done a long time ago. I called my lawyer friend, Mike, and told him everything. I sat on my couch, rereading Tom's text, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. Mom's talking to a lawyer. You better be ready. Ready? For what? They had already thrown me out, already treated me like I was disposable. Now they wanted to steal the one thing I built for myself? I wasn't just ready. I was about to make them regret ever trying this. I grabbed my phone and called Mike. My old college friend who had since become a damn good lawyer. When he picked up, I didn't even bother with small talk. "Mike, I need legal advice. Fast." His tone immediately turned serious. "What's going on?" I explained everything. How my family had kicked me out, how I had rebuilt my life, and now, how they were trying to claim my apartment as a family asset. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Mike let out a short laugh. "You're kidding, right? They actually think they can legally take your home?" "Apparently," I muttered. "Robin, they have no case. But I'll make sure they know that." A few days later, my parents sent me an official-looking letter. Initially, it appeared to be a legal document, a claim asserting their right to my home. But after reading it, I realized it was a joke. No legal backing, no valid arguments, just a bunch of nonsense about how families should share assets and how I owed them stability since they had provided for me for 28 years. I rolled my eyes and sent a picture of it to Mike. His response? "This isn't even real. It's just intimidation. They have nothing." But I knew my family. They weren't going to give up that easily. Mike wasn't just a lawyer. He was thorough. He decided to dig into my parents' financial situation just to see how desperate they really were. And what he found made everything make sense. My parents were in massive debt. Apparently, my dad had made some terrible financial decisions, and they were months away from losing their house. On top of that, they were being investigated for unpaid taxes. That's why they were suddenly so desperate to get into my apartment. Not because they wanted to reconnect with their daughter, but because they saw me as a free ride out of their problems. And I was about to shut that idea down for good. Mike's next advice? File a restraining order. "Robin, listen. If they're this desperate, they might try to harass you in person. Cut them off now before they escalate." I didn't even hesitate. I went straight to the courthouse and filed for a protective order against my parents. Within a week, it was granted. Now, if they even tried to show up at my apartment again, they could be arrested on the spot. I sent a copy of the restraining order to Tom with a simple message. "Tell Mom and Dad to stay away from me." His response? "You're really doing this? To your own family?" I didn't even bother replying, because my family had made their choice a long time ago. And now, they were paying the price. A few weeks later, I heard from an old neighbor that my parents had officially lost their house. Apparently, the IRS had come knocking, and my father couldn't keep up with the payments anymore. They were forced to sell the house at a loss, and now they were staying with a distant cousin. I should have felt bad, but I didn't, because this was their own fault. They could have had a relationship with me. They could have had a daughter who loved them, who supported them, who stood by them. But instead, they treated me like I was disposable. And now, they were the ones who had lost everything. For the first time in my life, I felt free. No more guilt. No more manipulation. No more family trying to use me for their own gain. I had cut them off completely. And now, they were the ones suffering the consequences of their actions. Even after losing their house, my parents still didn't learn their lesson. A few weeks after they were forced to move in with a distant cousin, I received one final message from my mother. It was a long Facebook rant, full of delusional self-pity and guilt-tripping nonsense. "Robin, I hope you're happy. Your own family is homeless now because of you. We sacrificed everything to raise you, and this is how you repay us?" I rolled my eyes before continuing. "You could have helped us. You could have let us move in. But instead, you turned your back on us." Then came the part that almost made me laugh out loud. "And after everything, you have the audacity to call yourself successful? You only have that apartment because of the years we put into raising you." That's when I knew. She hadn't changed at all. She still believed she was entitled to everything I built. Still believed that I owed her something, just for existing. I didn't respond to her rant. I didn't let her drag me back into the toxicity. Instead, I sent one final message to Tom. "Tell Mom and Dad to stop contacting me. If they try anything else, I'll make sure the authorities handle it. This is your final warning." Tom replied with a single word. "Understood." And that was it. That was the moment I truly knew. I was done with them. Forever. It's been 6 months since I cut them off completely. And in that time, I've moved into a beautiful apartment that is 100% mine. Got promoted to senior designer at work. Built real friendships with people who actually care about me. I don't wake up feeling anxious anymore. I don't feel like I have to prove myself to people who will never appreciate me. I don't feel trapped in their toxic cycle. Instead, I feel free. And for the first time in my life, I know that I deserve this happiness because I earned it. Without them, if there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's this. Family isn't about blood. Family is about who actually cares about you, who actually supports you, who doesn't just see you as a resource to be used and discarded. My parents and Tom, they were never my real family, and now they're out of my life for good, and I have zero regrets.